All right, it is the top of the hour, so we are going to go ahead and get the ball rolling. My name is Carolyn Fiddler. I'm Communications Director for Daily Kos, but I am also one of the nation's foremost authorities on state politics and elections. And I am thrilled to welcome you here today to our panel, Drawing a Decade, Why State Legislatures Are Our Last Chance to Stop GOP Gerrymandering. Because you're here today, you probably already know that this election year is not just existentially crucial in terms of electing a president who is not Donald Trump and is Joe Biden and with Vice President Kamala Harris. But it is also the last set of state legislative elections before the next round of redistricting. And that means this is our last chance to build Democratic power in states to keep Republicans from gerrymandering themselves into artificial majorities in not just the US House, but also in state legislatures all across the country for the next 10 years. So all elections are crucial this cycle. I am thrilled to be joined today by a great group of panelists, and I am going to let each of them introduce themselves right now.
Hello, everyone. My name is Amelia Sykes. I am the state representative for Ohio's 34th House District, which is based in the city of Akron. We call ourselves the birthplace of champions. You may know a guy named LeBron James, but I call my district that not only because of him and Steph Curry and Larry Nance Jr., who were also born here and are all champions, but because there's so many other great, wonderful people who were born and raised in my community who deserve to be acknowledged, even their names are not in lights. I have been honored to serve my community for the past 6 years, and earlier in 2019, in January 2019, I was elected to serve as the minority leader for the Ohio House of Representatives. So I lead a caucus of strong and mighty 37 Democrats who have been incredibly great to work with and incredibly effective, even though we are in a super minority that was drawn by the Republicans to keep us down. In spite of that, we have had a lot of really great legislative wins, including passing more bills in my first year as leader than we had in the 4 previous General Assemblies combined. I was recently awarded the Emily's List 2020 Rising Star Award named after Gabrielle Giffords. Incredibly honored to be recognized for my work with women and families and uplifting all of the women in my community and throughout, so that we can have a chance at a better life and a brighter future and an economy that works for us. And I am excited to talk about redistricting and gerrymandering, a subject that doesn't always get all of the street cred it deserves, but certainly one that is very, very important. So thank you all for joining us, and I look forward to the conversation.
Hi, everyone. I'm Leslie Mardis. I'm the Vice President of Political and Strategic Initiatives of the LCC, and I can't believe I agreed to follow up on that introduction to be the second one. But I'm joining you here from Washington, D.C. today, where we expect rain at any moment. It's hot and humid. But we're so excited about what the DLCC has been able to do so far this cycle. We've already flipped 450 legislative seats from red to blue since Trump was elected. We're committed to raising $50 million and spending it in states to flip legislatures, because we know what critical election we're up against here in 2020. That if we don't flip a lot of legislatures, including places like North Carolina, where Governor Cooper, be still my heart, doesn't have veto power over the maps, that we won't have any control. We won't have any way to push back. And we saw what happened a decade ago. So I'm really excited for this conversation. I worked in Democratic politics for a long time. It's really exciting to be on a Nets Roots panel, even virtually. And I'm just really excited to be here today. Excited for the conversation.
Thank you, Leslie. Hi, everyone. My name is Johanna Saliwaki, and I'm the interim vice president for our community and training and community engagement at Emily's List, new titles, so getting used to saying that. So my work there is really focused on building strategic partnerships with national organizations and progressive groups to expand and diversify the number of pro-choice Democratic women who are running for office. So for those who may not be familiar with Emily's List, we're the largest resource for women in politics. And this year we turned 35. So we're officially old enough to run for president, yay. And really, our mission is to elect pro-choice Democratic women at all levels of office. I've been with Emily's List for 5 years. And before joining our training and community engagement department, I worked on our state and local campaigns team in the Western region, mostly focused on building a pipeline and flipping state legislative chambers in Colorado, Nevada, and New Mexico. In this past cycle, I primarily worked in California, where we really focused on increasing the number of women in the state legislature, which in 2017 was only at 21% in a blue state like California. But in just one cycle with our partners on the ground, we were able to increase that number to 32%. Prior to joining Emily's List, I co-founded and ran a political consulting and public relations firm based in San Francisco. And in 2000, I actually worked for Census 2000 as a partnership specialist, working to make sure that we had accurate counts among communities of color, but in particular migrant workers in the state. And I'm here today because, our work at Emily's List is integral to redistricting. We know that when we have women in office, we get a different set of policies, that are more family friendly and certainly more women focused. And so, we're very happy to have, women that are leading state legislatures, like Representative Sykes, who's, our new Rising Star honoree. And so I'm happy to be here to talk to you all about our work in redistricting. So thank you.
Well, those are very tough acts to follow, but I'll do my best. Hi, everyone. I'm Gabby Goldstein. I am co-founder and political director at the Sister District Project. My co-founders and I started this organization after the 2016 election with the goal of building progressive power in state legislatures. We came to see extremely quickly how overlooked state leg has been for Democrats over decades, and how critically important they are as venues of power that we need to reclaim, critical to fair districting, which I know we'll talk a lot more about. This is our leadership pipeline. This is our policy pipeline. And so the idea was, and the name Sister District comes from the idea of a sister city. What if we were able to harness the energy and the resources from folks in one place and direct those resources towards strategic, winnable state legislative races somewhere else where we could make a big impact? And since we started, we've grown now to over 45,000 volunteers in about 125 active teams across the country. We've raised more than $2.6 million in small grassroots dollars directly for our candidates, and touched more than 2.5 million voters through doors, calls, texts, postcards. And this year we are focused pretty heavily on states that have redistricting implications, where the state legislature controls that process. We've endorsed 35 candidates, and we're at over $850,000 raised for them so far. Just extremely excited to be here with this all-star lady panel to talk about how important redistricting is.
Fantastic. This is Carolyn again. Thank you all so much. Really happy to be here with all of y'all. It is actually kind of funny. 10 years ago, I was my very first Netroots, and 10 years ago, I was also moderating a panel on gerrymandering and redistricting. And well, we all know how things went in 2010. It was not great, and we definitely want things to be much, much better this cycle and this year. So I would love to hear from each one of y'all more about what you, your organization, your caucus, are all doing to put Democrats in the best position possible to prevent another round of extreme gerrymandering for the next decade.
Yeah, so I guess I could jump in and start. I think the first most critical thing is to win elections this fall. I mean, there's a lot of attention on the top of the ticket, which is critically important. But we know what happened 10 years ago. Carolyn, you were making me think about 10 years ago. I was in North Carolina running the North Carolina House Caucus, and we lost the majority there. It was a painful night, but the Koch brothers flooded the state with money. I had one of my candidates up in Blowing Rock, North Carolina, call me from the post office, who did the age-old art of dumpster diving at the post office to check about negative mail against himself. And he found 10 pieces, and he called me and said, Leslie, I don't even know if I should vote for myself based upon what they're sending out. We couldn't compete. It was like competing against a tsunami with a piece of cardboard was how one North Carolina senator described it. And the onslaught, and I think that we weren't prepared for what happened with Republicans and their Project Red Map. They were smart, strategic. They have endless amounts of money, so they could figure out where to put it in as many places as possible and see what would work. And so I think we know that we have to be smarter about it. We know we have to invest more, and we've seen more groups focusing more on state legislative races, which I think is critically important, bringing more better candidates, better campaigns, more technology. I think one of the things we thought a lot about is making sure that our candidates are fundraising raising money low dollar from individuals. This was a big thing in Virginia last year, doing it kind of on the scale that congressional candidates can do. And hopefully, and knowing that that helps their campaign operation. So we've spent a lot of time really investing in candidates to get them across the finish line. So we're not just, winning in races and places that, we expect to win, but that we're really playing on these really tough Republican maps and we're able to win.
Hi, so this is Amelia. I'll go next. So we have, this is a lot, I'll say, and I'll try to put it in a smaller version without taking up too much time. So in 2015 and in 2017, Ohio did something really interesting, and we were able, through, a lot of hard work, a lot of goodwill, a lot of pressure from activists, put 2 ballot initiatives on the ballot in order to change our Constitution in adjusting and addressing the way that we draw districts. So the version that existed in 2010, when just like Leslie said, we lost the majority in 2010 as well. But what was awful for us was the apportionment board, which was our governor, secretary of state, and auditor responsible for drawing the districts, both congressional and statewide. And people just didn't like that. So we got these 2 ballot initiatives. We have 2 plans. There's a plan for state legislative districts and a plan for congressional districts. But basically it was people in the state of Ohio not liking the fact that the politicians were picking them rather than them picking their elected officials. And so we have been incredibly excited to try this out, and hopefully it works the way that we want it to work. But the reason why it may not is because we have super majorities in both chambers, the House and the Senate, and Republicans hold every statewide elected office. So it seems like we are on the path to destruction, even though we have these 2 redistricting plans. But what we did as a caucus was recruit top-notch, super strong candidates in the communities and areas where we thought we had an opportunity to win. And we were just talking about this before we started, where in 2016, everyone was all angry and ticked off. And so we were able to recruit all kinds of candidates in 2018, even had some primaries, which weren't so great. And then when it came to recruiting this year, people had gotten kind of beat up. So we had to be really, really strategic of where we put our resources. So we have candidates in our places where we think we have the biggest opportunities to win. And so we've been focusing our attention on those candidates, making sure that they feel appreciated and that we're cheering them on. We're getting them the fundraising tools, the talking points, the social media toolkit so they can communicate. We created a messaging brand within our caucus because everyone always talks about Democrats don't have a message. So we pushed out an Ohio Promise messaging. So we had something for our candidates and our members to run on. And we've told everyone who will listen about redistricting, and mostly about the fairness of it all, and made it into something that is generally not heard about until the census comes up, and people have been talking about it for years. And so now they know that this is a priority for us to break the supermajority in Ohio in order for us to realize the dream that we got from those 2 fair districting ballot initiatives. And so we've gotten the buy-in, which is really great. We've got partners from all over the country who have been willing to work with us, work with our candidates and our members to make sure that we keep the seats we have and add more. And so we're really excited about seeing what it looks like when we get to sit at the table and start working through this process. Now, when I say excited, I'm a little scared, and I know we'll talk about those details later, but nonetheless, it's been a full effort by a lot of people, a lot of partners who have decided to take this seriously and make sure that we put ourselves in the best position and we're not caught sleeping at the wheel this year.
Thank you for that. This is Johanna. I'm happy to go next. So I think, for Emily's list, because our work is so focused on electing pro-choice Democratic women, having a conversation around redistricting means having a conversation about protecting reproductive freedom, right? In order to make sure that districts are truly representative of voters in their state. And I think that what we've seen in these past few years, if not the last decade in particular, is Republicans controlled state legislatures advancing harmful anti-choice policies through significantly gerrymandered majorities in state houses all across the country. Last year alone, we had more than 350 bills attacking women's reproductive health that were introduced in 9 states passed laws limiting access to safe and legal abortion care. And I'm just referencing the reproductive rights bills because Republicans have also really gone after undermining families as well through their policies and legislation. So in 2016, we launched our Focus 2020 initiative, and that really looked at building a pipeline of future women leaders and flipping state legislative chambers with an eye obviously on redistricting in 2021. And the way that we've done this is by, again, electing, pro-choice Democratic women who we know are going to pass policies that are going to support women and families and fight back against a lot of what the Republicans have done these last 10 years, if not, longer than that. The 2018 cycle, we targeted 1,600 races in over 20 states that helped increase the number of women in state and local offices. And we helped flip 7 chambers. So that has really helped us lay the groundwork for us being able to gain some chambers and potentially flip some of these chambers in 2020. So that's really how our work has been focused on redistricting, is really looking at how it's connected to reproductive freedom and health.
I will again attempt to follow up these incredible acts here. This is Gabby. So yeah, I mean, Leslie mentioned Red Map in passing, and if folks haven't read it, there's a really fantastic book called Rat F by our friend Dave Daly that goes into really just frightening detail about the strategic way in which Republicans and their conservative allies came together in 2010 to take over masses of state legislative chambers right before the last round of redistricting. Obama was president, he was popular, it was a midterm year, a little bit of more of a quiet environment, and the GOP needed a different angle, they needed a different target, and they literally just went shopping for state legislative chambers, and they did a great job. And one thing that was super interesting, I wasn't in politics at the time, but Karl Rove put out an op-ed saying, we are going after state legislative chambers. I don't know what the Democrats are doing, but this is what we're gonna do. And they went ahead and did it, and so we need to make sure that we're not in that position this year. And so the way that we're doing that at Sister District is by supporting state legislative candidates who are Democrats who are going to fight for fair districting in this next round of map making. And so our political strategy is we're always, in any given year, we're looking for chambers, blue flips, chambers we think we can flip this year. We're always looking for blue holds, which are chambers where Democrats have a really fragile majority. And then we're always looking for what we call blue inroads, or no chamber left behind, those chambers where we don't have a good chance to flip, but we have to build power and we have to put a stake in the ground. And so this year, we're overlaying over that general strategy, taking into account the urgency of redistricting and the fact that this is our last chance to build Democratic power ahead of this next round. So we're heavily focused in states where the state legislature controls that process. And we're also focused on states that have a broader electoral opportunity for us, Senate battlegrounds, presidential battlegrounds, and those sorts of broader political moments, opportunities to take advantage of this moment. So that's the core thesis that we bring, and our theory of change is that we have to build progressive power in state legislatures to build towards the reflective democracy that we all want to see, and certainly that has redistricting and the corrosive ways in which gerrymandering has kept the voices of so many silent is a key feature of why we need to fight so hard for these chambers.
Fantastic. Fiddler here again. Thank y'all for those fantastic responses. A note for our audience. I see there are already a couple questions in the Q&A. We're going to continue the conversation among the panelists for a little while, and at the end we're going to get to as many questions as we can. So if questions occur to you during the conversation, just drop them into the Q&A, and we'll ask as many as we can towards the end. So just a programming note. Thanks so much. Yeah, Gabby mentioned the book Rat Fucked, and it is a harrowing look at I'm not gonna I'm not gonna euphemize that. That's exactly what happened. You know, those of us in politics at the time knew what had happened, but it's quite another thing to read it just written out, because they were proud of it. Because they accomplished exactly what they set out to do. That is why Democrats did not flip the U.S. House.
Yeah. I threw my copy across the room like 3 or 4 times. Every time it goes state by state, and you're just like, no, this can't be. And lent a copy to someone that was like, ignore the notes written on the side.
I imagine they were all expletives. So that gives us a little bit of a backdrop in terms of what's at stake if Democrats are not successful this time around. So I'd love for all y'all to talk about the stakes. So there's many stakes as I think people are out there. This redistricting, gerrymandering impacts so many things. So I'd love for y'all to talk a little bit about that.
So I'll go ahead and start then. So these stakes are incredibly high. This is Amelia. Obviously, I think we know that. And we really have an opportunity to frame what our next 10 years are going to look like. And I recognize and I can understand my counterparts on the other side of the aisle get it, and they're trying to figure it all out. But here's, something that's always important to remember. And for our state, Republicans have a trifecta. They are the majority of the Supreme Court, the executive branches, and they have super majorities in both chambers. And what's really interesting about it is when you look at, for example, our state legislative races in 2018, Democrats won 49% of the vote. Republicans won just barely 50% of the vote, but they hold 63% of the seats there. And so first of all, the biggest thing at stake is just the representation that our citizens deserve and desire and should have, because they should have a government that is reflective of them. But the other part is, I hear our beloved Senator Sherrod Brown say this all the time, that absolute power corrupts. And if you've looked at the headlines in Ohio, you will see there is an alleged $61 million bribery scandal, the largest in Ohio history, that is currently going down with the former Speaker of the House. And this scandal was allowed to actually happen basically in plain sight, with a lot of dark money groups putting all the money in, like Leslie was talking about, folks, looking at ads like, maybe I'm not going to vote for myself either. There is so much money on TV and in mail that they were able to perpetrate, and then gave $1 billion bailout to one of the energy companies here in Northeast Ohio, which is actually in the city that I live in. So with that happening, it becomes very clear, at least clear to me, that having one party rule every part of state government is, one, completely ineffective for a purple state like Ohio, where the vote totals, like I shared with you for the state legislative districts, are basically 50-50. It wasn't much different for the congressional districts, yet there's very little Democratic representation. And so these folks have been able to get away with horrific corruption, and it's sort of been their tradition, and they know they can do it. And this scandal that we're dealing with right now, it's not just about the former Speaker of the House. We've heard connections to the governor, to the AG, to the Secretary of State, to the county prosecutor. And this becomes a scenario where one party rule has just allowed themselves to be unchecked, no accountability. They pass whatever laws they want, as extreme as they want, especially to the negative benefit, to negativity towards Black people, any person of color, women, poor people, any type of minority. And it's been awful. And so we're seeing young people flee the state because they can go someplace else that is accepting of them and who they are, who they love. And they know if they're at home, they're not going to be able to find their Ohio. There's no American dream in Ohio for them. They've got to go find it someplace else. So the future of our state is really at stake here. Whether or not we have a government that works for people, that we can count on our state government to actually be good shepherds of their tax dollars, that they won't be selling their votes to corporations. And it's playing out and before our eyes, like right now. And so, while we started this conversation when I became leader, trying to break the supermajority, we're now in a position where we're saying, hey, we might be able to take the majority if we can get our people out. And that's it's a sad reality, but also really exciting for the possibility what it means for people in our state, that they can actually get the government they deserve, that we can have some equality and fairness. And I'm all about that. So I'm happy to facilitate whatever that means to make that happen and get us closer as a caucus to the majority. And again, it's a problem that they created themselves. They drew themselves into these redistricts. They corrupted themselves. They showed this their tradition. This is their legacy. And because of that, we're going to take over.
Hey, I'll jump in. And so is Leslie. Also at stake is Congress. Nancy Pelosi, speaker. That's really a lot of what I think people forget about it as well, too, is that, with state legislatures, a lot of them are drawing the maps for Congress. And in places like Texas, where we had huge wins in 2018 that helped us take back the House, we expect Republicans to be nice to us and draw nice maps with us, or fair maps. And we know what didn't happen 10 years ago. We know it's not going to happen this time around. So there's huge stakes both at the federal and state level. As the leader was just saying, I think you see it happen in state by state, what happens when Republicans take control and they have these huge partisan districts that they have now, changes the outcome of compromise and the ability to work across party lines and actually try to get something done. It becomes much more extreme. All the things that we're struggling with right now, making sure that people have health care, seeing the access that people have to safe COVID testing. I think we're really seeing right now in places even where we have Democratic governors, like in Pennsylvania, the Republican-led legislature tried to open the state up and bypass the governor's stay-at-home order. It's really people's lives at stake for a lot of this. And I also to say, it's also about representation. We know what happens when Republicans draw the map, that they draw women into districts with men and Democrats. They draw out people of color. They make those districts more difficult. And it's, we know how this game is played. So we know that there is way too much at stake to not pay as much attention as we can in the next 80 or so days.
Yeah. Thank you, Leslie. This is Johanna, and I agree with you and also the representative Sykes. Absolutely, representation is key here as the number one thing, that we all want to make sure that it's reflective democracy, that we don't lose, right? That's one. I think also the piece of this is the policies, right, that we're looking at. Again, I mentioned the 300 plus bills around abortion and lack of access to medical care and reproductive rights that have been passed just, in 1 year. But if we look at the last 10 years since the last census, it's been more than 500, right? And so really Republicans are using redistricting and gerrymandering as a blueprint that they could sell, just like they're selling all these policies, a blueprint that they could sell to other states of how they do this. I think one of the other things is, the census. The census is critical for us. Redistricting is based on the census, right? And so for us not to have an accurate count, that just means that also communities of color in particular and low income communities are going to get siloed and be completely disenfranchised. And so we're going to see folks that will have even less medical care. We're going to see folks that are going to have less access to education. And mind you, this is all in the middle of a pandemic, right? And that we're moving into. And so, certainly there's all these layers and repercussions that we're going to see if we don't have an accurate count that allows us to then, one, not have an accurate count, two, that we don't elect these women and these legislators into these key districts and flip these legislative chambers. So there's definitely a lot.
This is Gabby. Yeah, absolutely. Representation and policy were the two pieces that I wanted to mention, and just building on what everyone has already said. Just two examples from 2018 that I think really highlight this representation gap that gerrymandering creates in our states. So in Pennsylvania, in 2018, where we supported a bunch of candidates and worked really hard and won some great seats, and that was great. Democrats got 54% of the vote in the state house, but only won 45% of the seats. So a majority of folks voted for Democrats, and still Dems remained in the minority there. I think even a harsher stat, so to speak, is in Wisconsin in 2018, where Democratic candidates received 200,000 more votes than Republican candidates and won all the statewide offices, but are teetering on the brink of superminority in the Assembly and the Senate. So Democrats received 54% of the votes there too in the Assembly, and only won 36% of the seats. So you can see there how much worse it is in Wisconsin than even in Pennsylvania. But that's the sort of representation gap that we're talking about, and I think really highlights why. How this plays out. And so, Johanna mentioned the policy piece. To say the Dark Lord's name out loud, Alec is, really a huge mover behind the scenes in state legislative chambers in metastasizing the regressive policies that are at the center of the Republican agenda. And one of our core tenets here at Sister District is that states are our laboratories. They are a place where we can incubate progressive policy and share progressive policy. But certainly the counterpoint is true that Republicans have been doing that for many years. And just to put one final note on the policy piece is Johanna mentioned COVID. Right? And so COVID response and recovery is just starting, right? This is going to be a long slog. We're not through the woods yet at all. And whoever we elect to our state legislatures this year is going to be in office during the next 2 or 4 years, which will be a huge amount of time that largely will involve COVID recovery and response. And so, in thinking about the long-term effects here of this pandemic, which we're just still in sort of the early stages of, we have an incredible opportunity to shift the power of balance and elect folks who believe in science, who believe in public health, who want to make resources available, and all the rest. And so, that too is on the line this year with these elections.
Fantastic. Great, Fiddler here. Great answers, everybody. And most of y'all, everyone raised COVID-19, which is obviously very salient. And a lot of y'all talked about sort of the impact of redistricting on that. What about the impact of this raging pandemic on redistricting? What do you think? What do y'all think that looks like?
This is Johanna. I'm happy to go. So I think the big one is, and I mentioned this earlier, right, an accurate count. We have until October 31st to be counted. So I just kind of want to put a little shout out there. If you haven't filled out your census form, to please do that. And you can certainly do that by phone. You can do that online. Or through an enumerator that comes to your house. So I just want to put that on there. But I think, and then what we see is really, a domino effect, right? So the time the data is delivered to the states is going to impact how much time committees and state legislatures have to draw new maps. And this is an effect in shortening the window to collect public comment and testimony from the public to make sure that there's input and that folks really have a say in how these maps are drawn. Now, clearly, that's going to be with not every committee has the ability, not every state's going to have the ability to do that. But I think one of the big things is transparency, and we lose that, right, at minimum. I think many redistricting commissions are required to host public hearings. So that's another piece that's going to get short with timeframes just becoming shorter. I think for folks that are doing candidate and campaign work, it's going to impact recruiting, right? So if you're recruiting somebody in a district that hasn't been, is not a new district and hasn't been redrawn because we're still waiting for maps to come through, you may potentially be, recruiting a candidate that may not be eligible to run in that district. So that's why on our end, we're really ramping up our efforts to make sure that, we have women that are trained and that are ready to run this cycle. So unfortunately, it has multiple effects, but I think, you know, our work for the past cycles has really positioned us to make sure that we're ready for this and really deal with some of the effects that we're going to have, especially as it relates to recruiting women to run.
So this is Amelia, and I'll go ahead and jump in here as well. And Johanna, thank you so much for bringing up the conversation about the census and when the states will be given the information, because this is the thing that, well, one of many things that keeps me up at night is the fact that we have these two great ballot initiatives that are now constitutional amendments, but that also means that our requirements for getting all of these maps drawn are in our Constitution, so we can't push the dates back. So we are going to be working with almost 60 fewer days between when the census will deliver the information to us and when our first deadline is to draw our first map. So our first maps are due September 1st. That's going to be really scary. So that's our state legislative maps. That's our step one version. If we don't have the maps by September 1st, our next deadline is 14 days later on September 15th. And so after that, we may be stuck with a 4-year map if we can't figure it all out, and that will be problematic, and we'll be going right back through this process again. And with our congressional maps, we get just a little bit longer. We've got September 30th. So we're going to have to take all that information, analyze it, do all the things that we're required to do, have public meetings, public comment, opportunities for the public to join with us. Unfortunately, we don't have that much. And I've already started talking to my colleagues because I'm a co-chair of a redistricting and apportionment committee, and my Republican cohort has been unwilling to start the conversation, even though we are going to have a shorter amount of time to work on this. So we are dealing with all of these really partisan things, and it is going to be really problematic. But the thing I worry about the most is getting that census data in enough time to figure it all out, getting our members trained and prepared and ready and talking about something that's very complicated. Again, we've got 2 different ballot initiatives with 2 separate set of rules with different makeups and different vote counts, and it's complicated. And we talked about the book RET, FUCKED. And I gave a copy to every one of our members of our caucus and said, please read this over Christmas break, because I need you to know what we're up against. And I know this might not be the most exciting thing that you are going to read over this break, but you have to read it because I need all the help I can get. We've got to be a strong force in fighting this so we can get a map that's fair, and a 10-year map versus a 4-year map. So it's going to be interesting. So I'm sure there's going to be a lot of eyes in Ohio. There's going to be a lot of lawsuits, a lot of people lobbying, a lot of money thrown around, but we are, trying to position ourselves to be prepared. And, with COVID creating a lot of challenges, and particularly in a state like Ohio, where we do have a growing population of folks who are typically underrepresented, they're already hard enough for us to communicate with, because there's just not even a big enough group quite yet for there to be a safe space for them to work with us. And so that's just a general challenge. And then the COVID stuff, I don't even, good grief. I could spend another 10 minutes on that. I have a public health degree, and I'm very engaged in public health, and they ran our health director out. They've been talking about the craziest things ever. There are conspiracy theories left and right. The Republicans are trying to impeach the Republican governor because they are completely losing their minds. It is a complete and total cluster in Ohio. So what is the answer to that? More Democrats. And I cannot wait to deliver that for my fellow Ohioans.
Yeah, I was going to mention the misinformation out about census. And I think also as we think about the complicated nature of redistricting in states, I don't think people have a real understanding of how it's all done in their states, even the people that are going to be working on it. And I think that COVID has decreased the ability for transparency, decreased the ability to build partners on the ground in states. I think that's something we have to think a lot about. Just as we're concerned about administrators of elections in states, I think we're also concerned about how is redistricting going to happen in a particular state, and will people have the equipment that they need, the technology even, to do all this work. And I think COVID has slowed everything down, and I think that just makes people it has made people a little less trusting of the information out there. So I think we'll have a lot of work to get through.
This is Gabby. Yeah, just to sort of, again, reiterate some of the points that have already been made, I think that the main concern is an undercount, and particularly an undercount of communities of color and folks who have always historically been undercounted. And so this situation exacerbates what is already a devastating historical trend. And the mechanism for the undercount would be a combination of the things that folks are saying. The federal government has not made enough enumerators available, has not paid for enough enumerator positions. There is an inability to canvass, or canvassing of all kinds, and I'm sure we can all talk for days about how it's been on the electoral front this year, but the same is true for the census. Inability to get to the doors, and reluctance of folks, rightly, to open their doors during this pandemic is a concern. And then, just as Leslie said, the misinformation, and not even in a nefarious way, but just lack of information. This is the first census that can be done online. It's very hard to educate folks about new processes and things like that. And so that chaos and that lack of information creates a significant barrier that could result, well, I think is likely to result in an undercount. The question is probably not will there be an undercount, but how bad will the undercount be? How much worse than normal, when we already know that so many communities are undercounted? How much worse is it going to be this year? And what can we do to staunch that? So just wanted to add those pieces there.
Fiddler here. Fantastic. Thanks, y'all. I have just a few more questions that I'm going to direct at each of you individually, and then hopefully we'll have a little time for some audience questions. So audience, if you have questions, please drop them in the Q&A for me. Hopefully we can get to that. But first of all, Leader Sykes, you are on the front lines of this in ways that none of the rest of us are. As someone in this unique position, what do you want to make sure that activists know? What do you want people here with us today to take away from this?
Thank you, Carolyn, for that question. Again, Amelia here. What I would love for activists to know is the work starts now. It actually started probably 2 years ago, in getting this together with the candidates that we had and making sure that they actually are elected. I mean, thankfully, we've had a lot of help and support from Emily's List and the DLCC with information and recruiting and training our candidates so that they can be confident and prepared and ready to run, and getting them elected, because that's the major battle. We want to be able to walk into the negotiations with an army of well-trained, educated, smart, prepared, and kick-ass Democrats who are just not going to take this Republican crap. And we've been able to build our confidence with our own members, and now we're doing it with our candidates. One of the things we talk about when you talked about the congressional races and keeping the majority for Speaker Pelosi. Well, the way that comes through is it's a bill versus the state legislative one, which is a resolution. It's a mess. So it's a bill. That means it can be vetoed by the governor. And remember, I told you that the Republican legislature is currently calling for his impeachment. And so we've got, a situation where the governor very well might veto the lines drawn by the super conservative Republican legislature. And if they know that they can just override his veto, they're going to do it. I mean, they've been overriding all kinds of governor's vetoes. This is not the first one. This has just been the legacy and the tradition of Republicans infighting and just foolishness for the past at least 5 years since I've been in the legislature. And so if we can be a backstop or the front stop, really, to keep this from happening, that would be incredible. There's been a big conversation about our Supreme Court races, which will be the backstop in the event, because they have original jurisdiction on all maps that get challenged. But we should have both, because what's going to happen is Republicans seem to never run out of money. And so what'll happen is, we'll draw these maps, they'll get challenged, they'll go to the Supreme Court, they'll send them back to the same legislature who drew them in the first place, and they'll just keep going over and over until we run out of money. And so we just keep saying to everyone, it can't just be one or the other, it is both. And this is our democracy that's on the line. So you can't just rely on the state legislative races, and you can't just rely on the state Supreme Court races. We have to have both. And we need to have enough members in the legislature going in so they know when I say they, the Republicans know they cannot fool around with people in their futures anymore. And so that will be a mandate on them if we can build up our ranks and have some confidence going into that process. And then as we go through it, you know, I just want activists to know that we are actually on their side. I know there's a tendency, and especially now because we've got scandal and alleged bribery going on right now, that all elected officials are bad people. No, we are not all bad people. You know, please check the receipts, look at the people who have been in power for the past 30 years in Ohio, look at the people who drew the maps now. It is not me. None of those people looked like this. No brown faces, no women. So trust us, trust that we have your best interest in heart and work with us. And sometimes it may not seem like, you know, the results are exactly what we wanted, but remember, our job is to compromise. I mean, I know that's not always the greatest part about working with our activist friends, but we have to compromise. That's what we were brought in there to do. But the more members we have, the less we have to compromise, but we do not ever compromise our democracy. That is first and foremost. So we're in it to win it. We are in it for our people. We are in it for the citizens of our state. And we just want to send a message that we're just not going to take this anymore. We're sick of this. People deserve better. And we are on your side. So if I can say anything, which seems like such a hard thing to say, please trust us. Please. We're going to work for you. We really, really are.
Fiddler here. Fantastic. Thank you. And that is a really key point you made about Republicans basically being like money printer go burr. They do never seem to run out of resources. Leslie, as someone who is at the LCC and has the 30,000 foot view of what's happening in legislatures and elections all over the country, what kind of shenanigans are you seeing the GOP get up to this time around?
Yeah, so I mean, just like 10 years ago, I mean, we know that they're organizing. So the Republican State Leadership Committee, which is our counterpart on the Republican side, you know, has brought on, you know, has Karl Rove working with them again. Not a blast from the past. And then there's also a figure that we thought was gone after 2018, but Scott Walker, and I'll just boo for everyone on the line here, boo, has come back along with Newt Gingrich. It's like really like this greatest hits, question mark, worst hits, yes, kind of thing going on here, that they understand that like in order to get Congress back, in order to pass any legislation they want with ALEC, that they have to organize. So they've been putting money in some really interesting places. They've had to spend in Georgia recently. They put some money into that, which makes us, you know, really, we're really on offense here. And they put some resources into Utah. So I think that Republicans, when we know they have an endless supply, are definitely feeling like they are on the defense, which I think is a good thing. I mean, we always say around at the DLCC, if we flip 48 seats from red to blue, we're going to flip 10 chambers this fall. And that's a really good number to keep in mind. And I think it makes it more tangible about what we're trying to do in legislative world. But they also know that as well, too. So they're going to spread their money wide into places, try and protect as many chambers as they can, and continue to put out information and misinformation and try and get folks not to be able to vote in states. I mean, what we're going to see. And we should never expect that, like, while DLCC is doing really well at fundraising, we're doing much better than we did 10 years ago, we know that they are going to have a lot of money and it's going to flood in, especially if Trump continues to be in the state that he's going to be in, they will flood it into legislative races. So we should expect huge amounts of attacks in the last weeks of the campaigns in every state that you can imagine. And so, of course, we're all going to need those resources to help offset that.
Fiddler here. Fantastic. Thank you, Leslie. Just quick programming notes. In 12 minutes, all of us are going to get kicked out of this room. So just let folks know. We're going to try to get to as much before then as we can. Johanna, I know when I got started in this business of state politics and elections, I didn't think of Emily's List as an organization that got involved in races at this level of the ballot. I would love to hear a little more about that shift and specifically Focus 2020 and what you want us to know about what y'all are up to this cycle especially.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. Yes, we are definitely centered on state and local. It has been a big portion of our work pretty much since, the beginning. But in 2016, we launched our Focus 2020 program. And this year we made a very huge investment to build a pipeline of future women leaders and flipping state legislative chambers. We are targeting 11 critical chambers in 8 states. And we're working to hold Democratic majorities and expand, the number of women that are serving in state legislatures. We know that this investment is going to help us expand Emily's List state and local campaigns team, but also our Run to Win program, which is a community of 50,000 women who just in the last 4 years reached out to us and said, we're ready to run for office. So these women are really going to be the pipeline and building the bench for state legislatures, for statewide office, and certainly, federal offices as well. So, we're targeting, again, several states and state legislatures that control redistricting. We're also targeting legislative chambers where Republicans have consistently pushed for anti-women, anti-family agendas. So our Focus 2020 program really allows us to, again, flip legislative chambers this cycle and make sure that, women are really at the center of being the new leaders that are going to come in and really, create new policies and really lead these chambers for hopefully the next, decade or so.
Fiddler here. Fantastic. Thank you. Gabby, as someone who represents, heads the organization that is the most sort of grassrootsy of all the ones here, I would love to hear sort of your different perspective on this specific redistricting work now and what that looks like for y'all.
Absolutely. This is Gabby. First, I just want to do a tiny love fest and say that the state and local work that Emily's List has done over the past few years has been absolutely incredible. First under Jerry Prado and now under Sarah Kermey and Johanna. It's been amazing to see the leadership from these women and bringing state and local to be a real focal point for Emily's List and as a partner to us and a partner to so many organizations in this space. Just incredibly grateful for that shift as Carolyn mentioned, in that focus. And then for the DLCC, an absolutely incredible partner to us, another lady-led organization, Jessica Post, Heather Williams, Leslie Mardis. These women have taken the DLCC to a level that is incredible. To see the vision, long-range vision, the strategy, the focus, the execution has been incredible. And so I just wanted to give a huge shout out to our partners in this landscape. All of us on this call have some really incredible shoulders to stand on when it comes to looking at state legislative work. We're not alone. We have these incredible institutions with us. And so, yes, we are primarily, we are a grassroots organization. We are 45,000 volunteers across the country, organized into 100+ teams. And redistricting for us has never been our sole strategic focus. We have always beat the drum about the importance of state legislatures as a policy laboratory and pipeline, as a leadership pipeline. Half of all presidents started in their state legislatures, etc. But of course, as we led up to this critical redistricting year, and absolutely this year, redistricting is a focus for us from that strategic perspective, and our volunteers get it. We have now been educating them and working with, we're all learning together, right? It's a big experiment over 4 years now, and we're all on the same page as an organization of all of our volunteers, and it's incredible because we have very low attrition among our volunteer leaders. Almost all of our volunteer leaders who are with us today in 2020 were with us in 2016 and early 2017. And so we've all come up together in terms of understanding the critical power of state legislatures and how important it is that we work together. The other thing I'd just say, a quick plug for folks who may be watching or thinking about how to allocate their time and their activist attention is that state legislative races are such a great bang for your buck as a volunteer. These races are so much, their budgets are so much smaller than a congressional race or a statewide race. You can really get to know candidates personally. They'll come to your fundraisers, they'll stop by your phone banks and say hello and in a way that is really encouraging and inspiring. And it's a great time to get involved. So if you're interested in learning more about the 35 candidates who we've endorsed, please check us out, sisterdistrict.org.
Fiddler here. Thanks for that. We are running very low on time. I do want to take at least one question from the audience. We got one from Adam that is actually kind of an interesting bookend on this whole discussion. He asked, why do you think OFA and the Obama administration failed to consider how important state legislative races were in 2010? And that is a very important question. I think it's easy to forget the context that existed around 2010. What a lot of folks don't recall is that going into 2010, Democrats looked like they were in great shape for the next round of redistricting. After 2008, Democrats had majorities in 60 of the 98 partisan legislative chambers. Republicans only controlled 34. There were 2 ties. Everything looked great. And then in 2010, everyone's house on fire, every level of the ballot. So yes, in terms of like thinking long term, should more resources have gone to state legislative races? Arguably yes, but then again, keeping the Senate, trying to keep the U.S. House, all very important things. So I think that laying blame there is like super unfair. But this is 2020. It's going to be very, very different. And I would like to invite my panelists to give any final parting words before we go. We only have a few minutes left, but I had a great time, and I thank everyone for joining us, and I thank all my panelists. And if anyone wants to say something to wrap up, jump right in.
I'll just say that if this conversation, I'm sure now we're approaching 5 o'clock. I think the timing of this is perfect. I feel like folks will probably need to go have a drink after hearing about this, about redistricting and what we're up against. But there are great candidates running for state legislatures across the country. And just to tie in the OFA question, OFA, they were helpful in legislative races in 2010 when I was in North Carolina. But we haven't invested in legislative races as much as we have now. That's the difference. You couldn't really change the course we were on at that point. But now we have candidates running who have fundraising, or digital fundraising. I didn't have candidates with websites in 2010. We're making huge strides. And so I just want folks to know that it is tangible. Like I said before, we just need 48 seats to flip 10 chambers and puts us in control in a lot of different places. So I just want to make sure that when you go have whatever you're going to go have in 3 minutes, because it's 5 o'clock on the East Coast, you're welcome to enjoy this on the West Coast as well. But know that there is a path and there's things we can do, and there's a bright future if we all work together. And I also just want to say I'm so excited to have so many groups working with us in this space as well. It's incredible.
Hi, this is Amelia. I'd just like to, again, echo some of what Leslie said and say thank you for this panel, and thank you to everyone who stuck with us in this conversation that sometimes gets wonky, but is very, very important. The OFA question, I'd say it wasn't great that, we got slaughtered in 2012, but we've learned the lesson. And so President Obama, for example, has endorsed lots of candidates. I was one that got endorsed, and they are trying to right that wrong. And so let's look forward and figure out how we're going to do better. And we've got candidates across the country. We've got great candidates in Ohio. And I would just ask that you adopt one of us and take us under your wing and help us get over that hump. We really need the help, and people just don't know what state legislatures do. I mean, that's mostly the battle. They have no clue how much power we truly have, and there's lots and lots of reasons for that. We don't have time to get into it, but the more we talk about ourselves, the more that people talk about legislatures and what power we have in the decisions that we're making, we will see more people engaging, and then we won't have these conversations where we're blaming why didn't anyone pay attention then, and we'll just be saying, listen, how do we support these folks and do better next time to make sure we get the best results for our constituents. So thanks again for sticking in with us. This was great. Good to see you, ladies. Have a great weekend.
Great, thanks. I don't want to get cut off mid-sentence, so I think this is a great time to wrap. We have a minute left, and I just want to thank again all my great panelists for being here today. It's amazing to be at the head of a woman-led panel, all-woman panel rather. And we have a lot of work to do. So go fight, win, everybody. Thank you.
Let's do it. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.